Well, we have a nice group of people coming in the wet. It's quite the January, and thank you for being at BayCHI for the January 2023 program. Yeah, and I found there was a person in our dinner before the BayCHI. We have dinner, and dinner is basically us hanging out on Zoom because we don't get to go out to dinner anymore. That told the story of being up to almost the window of their car driving on a road in Merced this week. So that's quite remarkable. This evening, again, this is BayCHI program, and we're going to talk about voting and can graphics overcome overvoting. Overvoting is when people vote for more people than they are allowed to during filling out a ballot, and overvoting can cancel your ability to get a vote registered. So it's a very dangerous thing to do. And tonight we're going to have Nancy Frishberg, but before that, I'm going to just introduce who we are and what we do. So BayCHI has been around. BayCHI has been around since 1989, and I am told by one that knows that we've only missed 2 program meetings in the entire time. Just the sad thing about that is that means we're going to have a program on Valentine's Day next month, and we're just going to do it because it is not as an important a thing to miss Valentine's Day as it is to miss the 9/11 in 2000 or at the beginning of the COVID epidemic. So the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, is a big organization. A lot of us computer scientists are part of. SIGCHI is the foremost publication and conference in the community, which has been around since kind of 1983. So a few years later, we started having special interest groups in different parts of the country, world actually, and we are one of them. Next month, our program, second Tuesday of a month, is going to be about service robotics user interface. So there's several companies that are doing service robotics right now that are planning to, well, we'll see. Difficult to get everybody pinned down, but that's the goal. We have other exciting programs for the spring. For example, Don Norman, famous UX guy, built the first cognitive science department in the country. Used to be the vice president of R&D at Apple and also at HP at different times. He's going to talk about his new book. So that'll be our April meeting. So other things will come up. But we are also planning on having some visits, site visits, because people are sick of not getting to do anything. So we're going to get to go to an air traffic control center and look that over, and that's going to happen sometime in the next month. So stay tuned, and if you're interested, please, we want to figure out how many people want to go. So we will be, as soon as that's organized, I want to get people to sign up for it. Now, medical robotics is another thing we're going to go over to intersurgical and see how medical robotics is done. And so another thing is that we have these birds of a feather, and the one that's going to happen the 17th, that's next week at 7:30 p.m. is Sammy Ben-Sheriff, not Jamie, Sammy, is going to give a tour of OBS. It's a open source broadcasting system. So it's a way of bringing videos and audios together. Lots and lots of things you can do with it. So we're going to go through that, and we'll have a discussion about it. On the 24th, that's the 4th Tuesday of the month, we have the User Interface Life and Career. Edwin Lee runs that, and it's just a hangout for people that are thinking about their careers and changing jobs and getting involved with UX and stuff like that. So we really welcome everybody thinking about joining BayCHI. It pays for the website and for the Zoom thing, and anyway, it's a good community, I hope, for you to be part of. Now, in service of running the community, we have on the first Thursday, we have the steering committee, and the steering committee is a bunch of people getting together and just talking about what is the organization, how do we do things, what do we want to have a party or something. But among other things, it's where all the people that have these jobs that I'm going to show you here for a moment hang out. So the treasurer is is the person that keeps track of whether people get paid and this and that, and if they rent a translator or something. And that's a job that we have a interim. Steve Williams is taking responsibility for it, but he has other responsibilities. So we'd love somebody to get interested in that. Steve also is responsible for keeping the website and all technical things running. And we are really excited about making that some changes that we've been planning, if anybody's interested in helping work on that. I would say that there's other things that go on. For example, we are busily video recording and putting up on YouTube all of BayCHIs over the last dozens of years. And somebody that wants to supervise that, we have somebody that's doing the video editing, but we'd like somebody that checks them and works with that, gets involved as they want to. So the birds of a feather, as I said, one could join Edwin as a co-chair. They could join Sammy and I as a co-chair for our birds of a feather, the ones we were talking about, or they could suggest some other birds of a feather, something else that they would like to get people together on a regular basis. We've had people in the past, thinking about virtual reality or linguistics, or, there's a lot of things that one can think about in user interface. Well, I've been talking for a while here, and what I want to make sure is that we get on to the main event. And the main event is that I want to introduce Nancy Frishberg. Now, Nancy is a lifelong UX person with a big background in linguistics. And I first met her when she and I worked at IBM research, and she's worked many other places. And one of the things she's done is she's gotten involved with an organization that looks into voting in various ways from a UX point of view. So this is a description of what she was planning to do this evening. But I really think that it's more interesting for her to take over and let me sink away, and you can listen to her talk about this, about overcoming overvoting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ted. I'm going to try sharing my screen, and I think this should work. And now if I say slideshow, okay, thanks everybody for showing up today. And if you can't see it, wave at me because I can see most of you. Okay, so my question is, can graphic design, that is the insertion of certain kinds of features onto the ballot, help prevent overvoting? But here's what the order of things we're going to talk about today. I'm going to tell you introduce myself and the organization I was working with. I'm going to explain to you about county election offices that conduct elections, which I think many of the people on this call know, but people who may be viewing this later might not be so well educated. I'm going to talk about the various different constraints on layout that we have because of a whole bunch of reasons. Then I'm going to talk about the wording and layout options that these county officials were dealing with. Whoops, come back. One back. Can you go that one?
Are you talking?
Oh, sorry. Here we go. This is the problem with Google, whatever. Anyway, then we'll see what the results for that election were. And we'll talk a little bit about how to prevent overvoting in the general case. And then we can get into the discussion. And I know that I have at least 2 people who have served as poll workers besides myself on the call. Maybe the rest of you who are also poll workers will come out in good time. So some relevant things about me. I've lived in multiple states and regions of the US. I've voted in at least 2, 3, 4 states. I was too young when I lived in some of those other places. I have a PhD in linguistics, as Ted noted. I gave myself a soft landing out of academia and into industry, and I've worked with several nonprofits, and the one that's relevant here is the Center for Civic Design. I've been a BayCHI member since 1991, and I only moved back to California in 92. So that shows some dedication there. And I started registering voters at age 7, although I was not allowed to sign them in. Finally, what I learned was that at age 7, that not all adults know how to fill out forms, and that forms can be confusing for people who are not doing that kind of thing all the time. And that was an eye-opener for me. I went with my dad, so when it came time to swear somebody in that says, I promise I will be a good voter, he was the one who did that because he was over 21. You can ask me about some of these other topics if you like, but let's go ahead. So the organization I mentioned, the Center for Civic Design, I believe is 10 years old this year, and they have as their goal assuring voter intent through design. And you may also have heard this motto, democracy is a design problem. And you may also have recognized this definition, design is the rendering of intent. So all these things together tell you a little bit about the attitude of the organization and me going in to help them with some of the issues that they were dealing with. The work that I'm talking about here was funded by the Future of California Elections and conducted in collaboration with the League of Women Voters of Northern California. So here's the news. County election offices are the ones that conduct elections. There is, and the case study that we're going to take up today is the June 2016 primary for US Senator in California. So this is the map of the 58 counties of California. I am not going to give you a test on that, but just to note that there are indeed 58 separate counties. And here's a different map of that same territory where it shows population density. So the most populous counties are, San Francisco in terms of density, Orange County, Los Angeles County, and so on. Some of these big ones, up through, I would say, where that section 8 on the right-hand side of your screen is, those are bigger by far than the remaining counties below them, except Riverside is big and it's not so dense. Riverside County, that is. Anyhow, I think you'll see by this that why it is there's so many differences among the different counties. Each county gets to lay out its own ballot. And that's because there are specific contests that are specific to the counties. All of this is governed throughout by the California Election Code, the laws governing elections in the state of California. So this challenge that we are going to talk about today began with an open Senate seat. Senator Boxer said she would not run again for Senate and she would be finished as of January 17. So that meant somebody else with the right qualifications needed to run for office. And indeed, many people stepped up to do that. So one of the interesting things is that the qualifications to run for Senate are, you must be a US citizen for a certain length of time, your age, and you must be a resident of the state when you're sworn in. But the filing fee is 2% of the first year's salary for that job, or around $3,000, or 7,000 signatures of voters who would support your candidacy. That means it's a relatively low bar. I'm sure somebody who had to put $3,000 forward thinks it wasn't so low, but if in the big scheme of things, this meant that there was a huge number of people who stepped forward to run for office. And you may recall, if you're old enough or you read the history, that in 2003, we had an election to determine whether Gray Davis would be recalled as governor. And there were 100 candidates for the position of governor, and that's when Arnold Schwarzenegger won. However, notice that the difference between the 2003 situation and the 2016 situation is there was a single issue on the ballot for the recall of Gray Davis. Everybody knew you had to choose one out of all those things and out of all those candidates who were there. However, in the case of the primary of 2016, there was a field of, sorry, let me go back one second, field of 34 candidates plus a write-in spot that had to be displayed among all the other races and contests that were going on. So that made it different. Now, Ted already previewed for you that overvoting is election jargon for selecting more than the allowed number for a particular contest. If it says for supervisor, you can vote for up to 3. If you vote for 4 or more, that particular contest, your ballot is not validated. And the same is true in this instance where there was allowed a single vote among the 34 candidates or the write-in. And anybody who voted for more than one had their vote invalidated. Okay, what kind of constraints do we have on the layout of the ballot in the state of California? And I think this is probably similar to other states as well. First of all, there's the order of contests and the order of candidates. So it's not arbitrary what position things fall on the ballot. In fact, you have to show things that are at the federal level first, and president, if there is a presidential election, although there wasn't in 16, would have been first. And then, I guess there was one in 16, but we'll talk about that. Okay, so president was first, senator was second, and congressional representative is third, then comes state senate, state assembly, and so on. The layout depends on the tolerances of the kinds of tallying equipment that reads the marks. And so that means it depends on what your county, what the relevant county has as equipment. And the election officials in each county know what that is. And so they know not to try to put a solid line where there's going to be a fold in the paper as they mail it out to you, because that may or may not be detected. The folds are important to separate from the lines and so on. It also is the case that the law governs, I'm going down here, the law governs the wording for the instructions and includes notes about sizes of font, types of font, capitalization, and a whole bunch of things about the display of the wording on the ballot, which we could critique, but we're not going to change in time for this 2016 election. The print requirements also depend on the kind of equipment that you're using to read the thing, and it may dictate the layout of columns and the spacing between the names. So how many columns does your equipment allow, and how many names can you fit onto a single sheet of paper? There is an extremely short time between certifying candidates and mailing to overseas voters. I'll show you that. And don't increase the number of pages, even if you think that would help it a lot, because that increases the costs, both for mailing and printing. So it does also require a little bit of design skill. However, who is doing this work? These are the county officials. And in those tiny counties like Alpine and Mono, there is one person or maybe two who serves the role as county clerk, county assessor, and registrar of voters. And that's true actually for many of the smaller counties. So here's one person and maybe their assistant. Yolo County is a good example where there are 2 people running that office. So I sort of previewed a lot of these things. What you may not know is what's the order of names on the ballot, and that's determined by a randomization of the alphabet, so that in county number 1, let's say it's Alpine, no, probably Alameda is before Alpine, right? So in Alameda County, the order might be start with the letter. It's not even just start with D and go down. It's rearranged the order of letters. And then the next county down will start with the second in and the county will start with the letter. So that throughout the counties, the hope is that you will see that there will be a different order of candidates in each county. However, a county like Los Angeles will have the same order all the way through. So it's a little bit disingenuous that it's perfectly randomized. Here's where an example of the law dictating the style of font and the wording. And so you can say, sorry, that was my mouse moving. I was going to try to point, but I won't do that because it'll just mess things up. You can see not smaller than 30 point. You can see the words official ballot, which can be as small as 24 point, and so on. All these things are part of the California election code. Now, so that's the space, the equipment for the voting also dictates the spacing between contests on the page, the spacing between candidate names, and where the folds go, and by implication areas to avoid printing crucial information. A printed ballot and the envelope also constrain the layout, partly because the postal regulations determine what kinds of information can appear on the same face of the ballot as the address appears. And election regulations determine what information can appear externally versus hidden on a panel of the envelope. So all these things are dictated. Now here's my schematic, very, very detailed, of the March 2016 calendar. So there was roughly, I'll say, 8 to 10 days between the date when all the people who wanted to run were certified as yes, they did pay their money, they got enough signatures, whatever it is, and they've turned in all of their information. And then 8 or 10 days later is the requirement, this must be mailed to the overseas voters by that date in order for them to get them back to us by the election date in June. That's when it was in June. So that's a very, very brief time. So they've got to have a pretty good idea of what they're going to have on the ballot and how they're going to arrange it, just as the candidates get certified. And we already talked about extra pages, meaning extra postage because of weight, as well as, you know, other reasons. And here we had a natural experiment where 58 different officials are acting as designers, and each one is puzzling about how are we going to display 34 candidates' names in an unbiased way and communicate you can only vote for one of these. And this image is, we were sitting in a room and talking about this with several people. And luckily for us, Allison knew her way around the election code and was finding the relevant citations for us. Now, this was not the first project undertaken by the Center for Civic Design. And by this time, they had already published, I think, most of the field guides, the first 10 field guides. And these are available to all. If you want printed copies of them, I can get you a few, but they're also available online, and they are intended to be all accessible. The interesting thing, I'm not going to take them out and show them to you, but they are defined by certain topics. So designing usable ballots is one of them mentioned here. Writing instructions that voters will understand. Testing ballots for usability is a separate one, and effective poll worker materials. So you can get all of these, and there are printable PDFs for the field guides volume 1 through 10. Okay, and I urge you to look at that and enjoy that and share that with any voting officials that you might like to share it with. Okay, so here's where people had options about layout and some wording. And mostly it was about columns, boundaries, and messaging, where and what to use for messaging. So here are just a few things. Did they choose one column for the Senate race? Did they have to do 2 columns or more? And which face of the card? So I'm using election jargon here. A piece of paper is a card, and it has a front and a back. Those are the 2 faces of the card, okay? So how many cards are you going to have to display your whole election? and how many columns do you have? And as we said, it depends on which kind of equipment you're using, partly. How do you separate this particular contest from the others? Do you show the title of the contest? I'm going to give you examples of all these things. So anyway, let me jump there to one of these graphical examples. So on the front, which is shown on the left side of your screen, you can see that first box on the top that shows some instructions. Oh, we're missing a 2, all right. Anyway, that's the instructions. And all that wording that's above that bold mark, the bold line across there, all that wording is dictated by the election code, okay? Sorry. Contest order, the specific mandated language, and the instruction. For example, in this instance, this was Santa Cruz County. The instruction which says turn the page over, continue voting on the other side. And you'll notice at the bottom, that's the same instruction that says vote both sides. Now on the reverse of this, you'll see there are, you can almost see, there's a contest title at the top, U.S. Senator, which didn't get the box correctly, and the words vote for one. And then we have all of these people's names, and then we have the number of other columns. In this case, this is a 3-column format where printing exists only in 2 of the columns, okay? I'm going to see if we can, there we go. Whoa, did we do that? Yes. The type of voting equipment, we said this. Now, prior research, there was prior research on a long election like this. It says putting all the names in one column for a single contest avoids some errors. Most optical scanning ballots use a 3-column format. So one of them uses 3 columns of equal width per face, and it can adapt to 2 columns, one narrow and one double width. And a different system uses 2 wider, equally sized columns per face. And I'll show you examples of all those. I'm assuming we can do that. So here is San Joaquin County. And San Joaquin and the American Independent ballots. So there are 4 different parties which are were recognized in this particular election. On the front, we've got these 2 equal-sized columns. And for President of the United States, everybody noticed the president in the 1 column, and then all of the candidates for federal election for a senator, vote for one, are fitting in the 2nd column with the write-in case on the bottom. And then it says vote both sides because there are other elections on the back. So this is the U.S. representative for District 9, the state senator, the Assembly District 13, and the mayor of Stockton, and a measure supporting the suspension of legislation. Well, anyway, this Proposition 50 was on the ballot. And that's all that was on the ballot in San Joaquin County in that case. But it gives you an example of the 2-column format. Now I'm going to show you Mono County, a county with about 4,000 people, and yet they have to conduct a full election just like everybody else. And they chose not to put they have a 3 equal size column treatment here, and they chose not to put the Senate race on the front, but rather on the reverse side, so they could fit it all in because they didn't like how little room was left after the instructions. So president was on the front, and if you on the second piece on the lower left there is if you ask for a nonpartisan ballot, which is also called no party preference, NPP, then you immediately said you're registered as no party preference, continue voting on the 2nd side, on the other side of this page. And that's where they fit all those names into a single column. Yay. And then the rest of those measures. And not only did they have the state number 50, they had a local Proposition G about schools. Now here's the summary for you. How many columns? 25 English. 25 counties used a single column, like some of those we've already seen. This one on the left is Marin, and next to it is Shasta. and 33 counties used 2 or more columns. Okay, you're seeing San Diego on the right-hand side where it says sample, and then all the way over is Mendocino. And so San Diego fit it not only on this one side, but it says continued on the next page. And if you count the number of names there that are visible, it's only about 25, and this is 34 that we need to fit. So San Diego County divided it into actually 3 columns, 2 visible on one side and 1 on the reverse, whereas the nonpartisan ballot for Mendocino County shows 3 columns on a single side. And I think you're starting to see some of the other variations, like are there lines separating the 2 columns or not? Okay. So we thought about this, and we worked in our work with Santa Cruz County. We said, do you want to try for the 2-column treatment? Let's get some fast opinions. And so we went to the front of the county building, sat in the hallway there, gave out Cliff Bars for anybody who would stop for 5 minutes. And we said, the instruction we said to them is, we've changed the ballot instructions. We want you to vote to help us make sure that the instructions are very clear now. And we're giving you this wrong color of pen to prove that it's a test and not fraud. So people did actually say, how do I know you're not going to keep this ballot? It looks so real. Well, we printed it on regular paper and not cardstock. That's one thing. But we also asked people to vote in green or red, which are not valid colors. And the answer was 30% or more of eligible voters who wandered into that study overvoted. That's a huge number. And well-prepared voters were looking for a particular candidate's name. So that's a difference in the attack of if you're already a voter and familiar with things versus somebody who's a relatively new voter. And we got people in that testing because people were coming in to pay their taxes or ask about permits for building and so on. And then they stopped and talked to us about voting. And so we got people who were new voters, not yet voters, as well as existing voters, sometime voters, regular voters, a whole bunch of folks. And this is an argument in favor of usability testing, even when you think you don't have enough time. But it's sometime in that 8-day period between certification and having to send it off to the printer, get it printed, we were able to spend half a day, 3/4 of a day, and made some decisions in conjunction with the folks in Santa Cruz County. And at the same time as we were doing this, LA County did some impromptu testing with their new unique system, because that was the first time they were using this multi-card system. And they had similarly dismal results, way too many overvotes. So let's see what other kinds of variation and layout people offered us. Do we make the columns more or less equal so that they show that they're a single contest? Or do we just rely on these other mechanisms to show it's a single contest? So we're looking at Ventura County on the left, where they have spread the title of this US Senate contest across 2 columns, the right more 2 columns, and left president on the left side. And then, but they left the columns as close to even as possible with an odd number, because it's 34 candidates and 1 write-in. Versus Mariposa County, where they had the president in the first column of 3 columns, and then spread the Senate candidates all the way down the middle column and the overflow into the 3rd column. All of these creative solutions come to you from our election officials. How well did they separate it from other contests? So in many cases, the presidential election appeared in the same context, on the same surface, the same face, okay? And now we can see how is the Senate contest separated from other things. And in Nevada County, they had the 2 columns, but they did not wrap the title of that across the 2 columns that they're using in the middle and the right-hand side. Okay. So some of the things we were when you don't have a single column and you choose to do 2 or more columns, the question is, make the instructions span all the title and the contest title span all the columns? Do you add a separate heading for each column? Do you add some? Do you use arrows? We're going to see a whole bunch of variation here. Do you remove any lines between the 2 columns to show the unification of that? How can we do this? So in this first example, the title of the race is indicated by 3 levels of shading: voter nominated offices, which is an opaque term to voters, United States senators, and then candidates listed in 2 columns, vote for one, okay? And it shows at the bottom, there's this label, candidates continue in the next column. And at the top, it says continued from the previous column. So we hope that people understand, this was San Bernardino County, that these were all a unified contest. And here's some more examples of how they showed the continuing. This is Tulare County. Here's another example where the instructions for everything spans all the columns. This is a no party preference ballot from Kern County. And there's 3 columns for the instructions, 2 columns for the state senator to show this. And this similar treatment was used in 16 counties. So Kern is just an example here. It's not the only one. Now, there were various mechanisms to unifying the 3 columns, including no columnar lines and the contest wrapping across the whole page. And so we see here Mendocino County's method, and the differences there are, one is for a party ballot with the candidates for the party at the top, and the other's for the nonpartisan ballot. Got it? And again, now we've got another mechanism. So we have more candidates shown with arrows at the bottom of the first column and the top of the second column. And 2 counties did this. We're showing you Yuba. Here's another one, San Diego County, which I mentioned earlier. So they actually had 3 columns on 2 faces. And the vote for one message was often amplified by getting mentioned more than once. And the question I had was one of these patterns going to work better than another? So in this case, at the top, we've got Butte County, where they've got the vote for one aligned with the US Senate and over the spot where you're going to make your mark on the left-hand side of the names. And in the San Mateo County on the lower part, again, vote for one aligned, left aligned as the marking spot is aligned. Here we go with center aligned for Mendocino County, where it says 3 levels of headings, US Senator, US Senate, and vote for one. Whereas in the middle spot, you have Calaveras County with a similar treatment, 2 levels of shading, and Tuolumne County at the bottom. So the vote for one in those cases is center aligned and not over where the mark is going to be made. And then we've got the folks who have vote for one right aligned, and sometimes that goes with a right-hand marking where you connect the 2 parts of the arrow, but sometimes it goes with a left-hand mark, as in this lower one, Glenn County. So Shasta on the top, Glenn County on the bottom. 22 counties had the right alignment of vote for one. So what I'm telling you here is, in great detail, how many variations there were for each one of these different features. And the question is, did any of these make any difference? So Alameda County here treated it differently in one case versus another. So all 58 ballots are different from one another, and you can look at the evidence yourself. And we received either PDFs or a scan. We scanned the example of each county's ballot, and these are in an Evernote notebook, which is open to the public. So we're happy for other people to see if they can figure out differences. And so now I know you're all biting your fingernails, waiting to know the results, unless you read some versions of the abstract that I put out. And that is, keep in mind, overvoting ordinarily occurs less than 0.5% of the time. And here's one of the sets of instructions that might have been given. So they include in vote for one and correctly only voted for one, John Smith of Party C. But the wrong case, which is marked in several ways with red X and a strike through circle, has too many ovals filled in. And so that's the kind of instruction we hope is going to help people, but it can't occur on the ballot. It has to occur somewhere else. In this case, overvoting rates were as high as 3.6%. At least 235,000 votes were disqualified for this Senate race because of overvoting. And what you can see here is the difference in 2 columns, 2 pages, 1 column, and so on. So this was a little coding on how the ballots were. And so since so many of them, we got this overvoting rate in lots of places. So
you're saying 2 columns was worse. Do we get to
2 or more columns is definitely worse. Yes. Now, so the question we asked earlier was, does design of the ballot prevent overvoting errors? And the answer is somewhat yes. The design of the wording prevents some errors. The choice of 1 column over more than 1 column will help. And the choice of a single face over a second card or face also helps. And no, even careful ballot design choices don't eliminate all the errors in voting. And a very large candidate pool presents a challenge both for voters as well as for election officials. Voter education also helps to prevent errors, as we saw in that earlier example with the illustrations. So how do we prevent overvoting? Now, wait a second. Let me also say there was so the way in which we know this is because some political scientists who are colleagues of ours went through, looked at the results in the months following the election and just said, none of these other factors had anything to do with the overvoting that we could detect. It's all about the confusion of a multi-columnar and too many candidates. Okay, there is another piece of this that can help, and that is, So overvote rate in the Senate primary, stop using the mouse, is 4.1% of the ballots cast in counties using a central tabulation system versus lower overvoting in places that had tabulation at the polling place. So if you're scanning the thing at the polling place, it can spit it out for you and say, there's an overvote, and it can get corrected before the actual ballot is submitted finally. Whereas if we're sending all the ballots to headquarters and that's where they're going to tabulate everything and not scan ahead, that's when we get in trouble and we get this much higher overvoting rate. What do we mean by updating? What do we mean by voter education? Well, if there's time, we urge the county officials to provide the information in the voter guide. And here are 3 different solutions for how to emphasize that message of vote for one. And 3 different counties figured out each their own way to fit it into the voter pamphlet. Everybody knows that you get 2 pamphlets from the state of California, one from the Secretary of State's office, and then your local county office of elections. And so it's the county office of elections that we were paying attention to here. Although I suppose if the Secretary of State had wanted to, they could have emphasized it too. You can read through the example, but there's several different ways that people found to emphasize that this Senate race was important and you should only vote for one candidate. Well, what else besides ballot design? What else helps? And I will say policy, regulation, and law are all change-worthy. And one of the great things about working with election officials across the state and through the Center for Civic Design with election officials across the country is that these people often recognize where there are gaps or conflicts and paradoxes between the law and the regulation, or the law and the practicality of things, and the law and the dates for the election. And they can propose changes in laws or regs. But I also want to say that overvoting is not. And here's another one, another example. Undervoting is an issue. So Broward County, Florida, I'm getting a message that, okay, Broward County, Florida in 2018 created a ballot that effectively hid the US Senate race at the bottom of those instructions. And people overlooked that, those two little spots at the bottom, the Senate and the representative to Congress. And other counties did not have this particular layout, but many other counties did not have the issue of 3 languages also. And so the fact that those instructions appear there in 3 different languages takes up a lot of space. We know people rarely read the instructions, and so people were guided to skip that first column. And in Broward County, 3.7% of people skipped that contest compared to 1.2% or less in other counties. So overvoting, undervoting, those are 2 big issues that we can talk about. Here's some references, and I'll make sure that that is available to everybody. And I'm ready to have an open discussion with the whole gaggle of you. This is my team at the polling place in Livermore at Celebration Church last November. And all these people are citizens like yourself who came to help with the conducting of the election. We have one student also who did this as kind of extra credit for his government class, I think.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I want
Stop
to
sharing. Yeah.
I want to start by you presented, centered, right, left, column, and the data I was really excited about is if we could actually go back and recall which of those mattered. The layout of these titles that you spent a lot of time going through.
Let me go back and share again.
Because that you really looked at a lot of different things, and they seem subtle, but I actually believe you that the work was worth doing, and those different alternatives were worth.
Well, I felt like here's this natural experiment. Here, I'm just going to come with this general look. I felt like here's this natural experiment. Here are people who are very experienced in running elections, are not professional designers, know what the constraints are because they're living with them all the time. And time is one of the biggest ones. But, have only a few things that they can play with. And the answer is, Ted, telling people vote for one is really not enough, right?
Yeah, I got that.
Right.
So, but, did you pointed out several of these design differences are now the one that I noticed quickly in your pie chart was 2 columns are bad, multiple columns are bad.
Right.
Can you make any comments on the other ones, that the title across all of them, or the left, right, center things? There
weren't enough data to make a difference, and none of it was going to overcome this problem of too many names on one contest.
Yeah. So I'm just going to leave it with one story about LA County came to me when there were 139 people on the ballot for the Gray Davis recall. And I was asked, and they did not take my suggestion, and we didn't go further, but it's just a funny story. How can we make it so that there's no precedence? That means none of the people that you're voting for, you're more likely to vote for than any of the others. Because actually, in many jurisdictions, they are required to put the incumbent first, for example, in the lineup of the candidates. But I was asked the opposite. How do we make it so that nobody has precedence, not the incumbent, for example? And my idea, and then I'll say one more thing about that ballot, and that's all. My idea was to make it a roulette wheel, so that you could spin this wheel around, and anybody could be, shown as at the same position. So it was all in a circle, which is kind of a silly, glib response. In fact,
and then how do you get that to print and tally?
we had not gotten that far.
Okay.
But that it's something that yeah, it's a complicated, because that particular thing in LA County, the problems that Nancy's pointing out so correctly were those candidates went over 8
Faces.
Yeah. So you had to go through 8 faces to find them all. And what we found was that if you were one of the 4 top candidates, that was Bustamante, Gray Davis, Schwarzenegger, and I can't remember what the 4th one was. Everybody next to you on the card had a 0.5% more chance of getting a selection than if they were anywhere else on the ballot, which meant that people, and this was a paper that a woman named Sarah Hill wrote, people vote more for selections next to people that they recognize accidentally, because they make the mistake of slipping and pointing at the thing next to the one that they meant to vote for. So that's just a interesting
right. And I mean, there's lots of other statistics that the first person, in the order is going to get more votes than others.
2% more.
At least, right. Yeah. And as we know, then you got that slip thing. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's called, what do they call it? There's a name for it.
I'm sure there is, and it's not coming to me either at the moment. But you also get that phenomenon of, if you're looking for a specific name, right, then those who are close to that name are likely also to get the missed vote, the wrong vote, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm moving my mouse.
Okay.
That's a big
So
mistake.
we should let other people ask questions besides me. I'm sorry, or tell them. I see some people's experiences here showing up.
I'm looking at the comments. So
Good.
So Jeff asked about, can the poll workers draw people's attention to this concern? And
Marissa actually speaks to that a little bit too.
And so Jeff, here's the interesting thing about that. Of course, we can do that as poll workers. The tricky part is, do you know how many people actually come in to vote these days? It's less than 10% of the total votes cast. So it probably won't have an effect on the percent. I mean, it may have an effect on the 10% of people who come in, but it's not going to have the desired effect on the 90% who are voting by mail.
In California.
In California. Well, and it won't have any effect on anybody in Oregon who's voting by mail, in Colorado who's voting by mail.
17 states do this.
Yeah.
Nancy?
Yes, please.
So the problem of people intending to vote for candidate A and accidentally voting for the one right next to them seems to be aggravated by the distance, at least in the cases where there's name, party affiliation, and then flush left and then over flush right are 2 halves of an arrow, and you fill in the arrow, the center. And that is quite a distance away from the names. Is that location required to be over there in the far left? Is there any reason why those columns couldn't be reversed?
No, they can't, because that's the way that voting system is set to work.
So that's called the Sequoia system. And the Sequoia system has this join thing, and it's in a specific place.
And a second question related to that is, you've got candidate A, party preference, Democrat, and then their occupation. Is there any reason why those all have to be flush left? Because if the names of the candidates were all flush left, and then that secondary information like their party affiliation and their career, if that was indented slightly, it would make it a lot easier to scan the column to pick out the names.
Yes, I'm not sure, but I suspect that is codified in the election code.
Well, that's really dumb.
Yes, there's a lot of dumb things about that. And one of the things that I thought I had included here, but maybe it's coming up later, is, no, that's not the one. Anyway, here, did we talk about this one? Yeah, we did.
We have a blank right here. I don't know what you're looking at.
I'm looking at the overvoting.
I know, we see a blank screen.
I'm still sharing, so let's see. Hold on one second. Let me see if
You
I
might
can.
want to share a different screen, maybe. Ah,
Hold on. We are loading. Okay. That was the other one. Now there was something else.
that looks better.
Yeah, you can see that one now. But I can't, let me see if I can see the chat at the same time there. No, I can't see the chat while I'm doing this. Okay. So yeah, there's way too much stuff in there. Oh, I know what, sorry. There is okay. This is the other thing let me stop sharing this and share something else. Here, share this. Let's do sharing. And where is it? This one, okay. This is the Center for Civic Design. And now I wanted to find out, there's several things that I've been looking at there. This one is the one I wanted to show you. So Whitney Quisenberry is the one of the co-founders and the current executive director of the Center for Civic Design. And she wrote this thing about don't legislate ballot design. There's a better way to improve the ballots. And she's talking about, don't codify these things. She's got another example besides the one that I had. But, this law doesn't support good design because the equipment is going to change. The way in which people are receiving the news is going to change. We now have electronic marking devices in all of our polling places in California. And so that means it doesn't, what size the font is going to change depending on how you set the magnification and so on. And so what Whitney's urging is don't write such specific things, but rather make ballot standards and turn it into regulation rather than legislation so it can adjust when the equipment changes, when the new technologies come out and so on. You won't have to rewrite all the election code. And so Virginia, for example, adopted new ballot standards with the help from the Center for Civic Design. And so that's a model for, and as we all know, as UX designers, a good design system can go a long way. And it doesn't have to be as specific as this size font, this type of font, all caps, whatever, because we know all caps is harder to read for lots of people. Anyway, I'm going to stop sharing. That's the article I wanted to draw your attention to, and I did that. Let me go back and see what else you guys were talking about in the chat when I wasn't paying attention.
Well, I just want to say something about font design that you just brought up. So our friend Aaron Marcus kind of started his career by pointing out that, layout and font design are, really change the way people can recognize and read, interfaces, but also, of course, we know it's true for things like this, where this is an interface that is quasi-computer interface.
Well, in many cases, it's not a computer at all. You get a paper ballot, you sign a paper, you fill out your paper ballot and you send in your paper ballot. If you want more on fonts, Ted, I think, and everybody else too, you may be interested in Gareth Williams, a Brit. Do you know him? And so he's been doing a lot of stuff related, as a dyslexic himself, he's been doing a lot of work on which fonts actually are more readable versus reputed to be more readable in different contexts and so on. So he's got a pretty complicated study that he's been conducting, and people may be interested in reading that and critiquing that. I think, yeah. So John, you have been an election official in what county in the state of California? You can unmute if you like. John Boykin.
Yes,
Oh,
I
yes.
had to unmute and all that.
Yeah.
Yes, I was an election official. It was 40 years ago in Fresno County within California. And so I would like to get involved. I would like to talk with you sometime later because I'd like to get involved with this organization and help out. So yeah, I care a lot about ballot design and the way elections are conducted, and it desperately needs more design input.
Absolutely. So just let me see this one. Okay, and then the one of the topics, and I wanted to call attention because I know that Maricela, you've also been a poll worker, and I know that Sam, you've been a poll worker, and anybody else who's on the call that I didn't know about?
I've just been an election researcher.
Right, right.
And one thing I'll mention that most people don't realize about elections is that you only have a significant election every 2 years. You only have a major election every 4 years. That means you get very little opportunity to practice. And the people who were involved in the last election may be long gone by the time the next one comes. So there tends to be a shortage of A, institutional memory, and B, ways of learning from the mistakes of last time to correct them next time. And so the idea that, oh,
Yes.
the poll workers should do X, Y, Z. Okay, well, the poll workers are volunteers who you're lucky if they were around last time. And they're not going, and they got maybe an hour or two of training, unless they've done this over and over again over the years.
But things change,
Things change.
between last year and this year, or even between the primary and the general election this year, things changed. And, because I was going to be the captain of the same vote center and I had requested getting most of the same people back, I said, if they're available, I'm happy to take them. We're running as a tight ship. We really know how to work with each other. And so that was good. But there were certain use cases where I said specifically to the trainers, what do I do in this situation? For example, somebody comes in, has it with their original ballot, but they haven't marked it yet and they haven't sealed it yet. And they say, I want to turn this in and get a fresh ballot. And then I say to them, that's fine, you can do that. We're just going to give you something that looks exactly the same as what you've got. If you want to, vote it here, you can, and then we'll put it in the trolleys and the secret, But it turns out you can't put it in the regular trolley for the regular container that we put the ballot box in, right? The ballots in that are cast there. You have to put it then into the vote by mail box. So we're at the polling places, we collected huge numbers of vote by mail ballots this last time, and even in the primary, because there was so much talk about the U.S. postal system not being secure or acting with full integrity or whatever it was. So we got a mess of vote by mail ballots at the polling place, which was fine. We're happy to take them. But this little tweak of you come in carrying your original ballot and you want to cast it, we can let you do that, but you're going to cast it as though it were a vote by mail ballot.
Sure. It'll
get counted in the vote by mail pile. Ted, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to John's thing there. In Florida, basically what happens is if you get to practice before you vote on a new voting system, it makes a gigantic difference. And in Florida, for example, they, by giving people the experience and making people, they went around with an RV and showed people how to use the voting stuff. They reduced overvotes from 1.9% down to 0.4% in 2004. So it is not a small problem you just brought up. It's a wonderful thing that can be solved with just getting people the experience and exposure and practice. And Brazil, for example, does a very nice job of making these voting machines available way in advance, 3 months in advance, and having people in malls and shopping centers and things try them out. And it's just a great idea of yours to get people experience because it's done so rarely, among other things.
And I want to surface Jeff's comment. I'm changing the topic slightly. Thank you, Ted. And I want to surface Jeff's comment about ranked choice voting. I still think ranked choice voting is very hard for people to understand,
Except in
including
Ireland,
election officials.
except in Ireland, where they've been doing it forever and it's a national sport. So, you know, if it's a game you're used to, I mean, it's back to what we were just talking about. If you're used to it and understand it, then it's what you do. And if it's brand new, then you don't know how to interpret it. And I think that's my belief about it, because of
Right.
how it works in Ireland. Always does it. They love doing this, and literally they take 2 weeks to go through the ranked choice, and then the reporting all in newspapers and on the televisions, and everyone's betting on it. It's crazy.
And Lisa confirms that even for a well-educated person, it's hard to get the thing right.
I
Jeff, do
completely,
you have any? Yeah,
completely
Lisa
messed
or
it
Jeff?
up. Completely messed it up. Yep.
And Jeff, you want to tell more about that?
Well, no, it's just, I was helping the San Francisco voting office with some of their voting issues for a while. This was maybe 10 years ago, and they were introducing ranked choice voting, and they just had a problem with people either just voting for one candidate and not voting for anyone else, or people voting for 3 times for the same person because they didn't want to put anyone else's name forward. And that, I don't know if that counts as an overvote, or whether the machine just sort of takes your first choice and doesn't give you any other choices. If you just say, let's say John Smith, Mary Jones, and Fred Chu are the 3 candidates, and you're supposed to rank them 1, 2, and 3, and some people just say, John Smith, John Smith, John Smith. Does that count as an overvote?
That's a policy question.
Yeah, I don't know how that works because I haven't worked on a ranked choice voting problem yet.
Yeah.
It's San Francisco, Oakland has it, and there's lots of other jurisdictions that are adopting ranked choice voting. And the reason is it saves you a mess of money. You never have to have a runoff, and you don't have to deliver all that equipment to a specific location multiple times for a single election, and train all these people to show up too.
Saves you many of money when things work correctly, and you don't have the problem that we just had in Oakland.
Right, right.
But there also is an organization that pushes for it, that says that it gives a better outcome. And there's a literature that one can look at, and there's a lot of discussion about it.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
I wanted to comment as someone that has been a poll worker, and I've worked in libraries, so my focus is mostly on not mostly, but a lot of it is on service design. That the poll workers often are trained, it can be 2-3 months in advance, and forget, the training that they had that lasted a few hours. A lot of the times, them practicing on the machines is an option. It's not required. So then they get to the election polls the day of, and they don't know how to use the thing, or they practice again months in advance and they've forgotten how to do what they practiced so long ago. You are supposed to arrive, I think it's 1 to 2 hours early, and you just meet the people you're going to work with all day, when you don't know these strangers. Sometimes, I think all of the times I've done it, the person in charge has been late, or people have been missing, people arrive, or you don't have enough people, and so you can't have breaks, or you have to, they have to bring someone in, they have to bring in an extra person. It's been very chaotic. And often the person in charge, I feel like they just wanted to supervise, and they didn't want to, and they wanted more pay, so they did the kind of manager role. But they have to fill in for people so that people can take breaks. And they, were not prepared, and I kind of took charge and had to be like, okay, this person needs to take a break and we need to rotate, or they didn't memorize the manual like I did, and I had to be like, no, actually on page such and such the law says this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're not supposed to put the ballot in this thing, we're supposed to put it in that thing. And then it's typically the people that are poll workers are people that aren't working. So they're like retirees, or students, or people that are unemployed. Sometimes I have been unemployed, and it's like, yeah, I'm not used to really working with people like that, working in a team. Or another part of that is, I forgot what I was talking about.
It's a good list.
Oh, I have taken off time for work to be a poll worker, and that is uncommon. People do not do that. So it's kind of like being on a jury. I feel like you don't get your peers, and so right, that's how I feel. And I feel like most people don't know that poll workers get paid. I feel they think they volunteer because it's like elderly people, they think it's just retirees doing that.
And here's the interesting thing also
volunteering.
about where it's happening now. The state of California a couple of years ago, 3 to be exact, implemented the Voters' Choice Act, which means that we're sending out all the ballots as vote by mail, and you are allowed to come in and vote, but we're not doing precinct level voting in most counties anymore. We're doing vote center voting. So that means within a county, you can go to any one of the vote centers and be issued a replacement ballot for exactly your precinct. That is your water department, your housing commission, and as well as your assembly person, and so on and so forth. So that part is great. The ballot on demand part is great. However, I want to underscore something John Boykin said before, and that is when you come to vote, and the same is when you come to be an election worker for the voting, you do it infrequently, and yet we expect everybody to do it perfectly, right? You've got to cast your vote just right, and we as election workers have to treat it just right, even when you are one of these one-off cases that we hadn't really trained for. So
yeah, and I would just add that designing for an election, both the design of the ballot and the process kind of design is actually very comparable to designing a website in a couple of important ways. Number one, you're dealing with the public, which is always a random, chaotic thing. Number two, the less you have to rely on instructions and prior education, the better. Because number one, most people won't pay any attention to it. Number two, the few who do will forget it by the time the moment comes. It has to be as self-explanatory in the moment as you can possibly make it without relying on any prior knowledge, even from 17 seconds ago.
good, thanks. Lisa has a hand raised.
I was just going to say, but you're dealing with the law. It's so
Yeah.
counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Lisa.
I had a question for you, Nancy, and of course, all you other experienced poll people. So the practice, whatever they call that, newsprint, ballot that you get.
Sample ballot.
Okay,
Yep.
so what I don't understand and causes me a problem, and I'm sure I'm not alone, is
Okay.
I always assume, and I know it's, wrong, but I assume that what I see in that booklet, I will find the equivalent of on those cards, so that I ideally can just transfer, work it all out and figure it all out, and then go and transfer it onto the card. And the thing that, frustrates and causes me an error is that I find there are people missing. There's not that well, where was that proposition? What's it that kind of thing? What is the deal with that?
That shouldn't be, but it is the possibility. Now, one of these things may be that the sample ballot may not include all the propositions because the propositions are coming from the state, and all the rest of the offices are, and things are being handled by the county. So, except the certification is coming from the state of who's a candidate and who's not. So I'm not sure why your sample ballot doesn't look like your regular ballot.
Because I think that might
it
help
should.
some if
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Well,
And the
it may
intention is you
also,
get a, go ahead, John.
it's also possible that maybe you're looking at a sample ballot for one person and going to the polling place for another person, because at least when I did it way back when, within a given county, there might be multiple sequences. So in one area, the candidates are listed ABC. In the next group, they're listed BCA, and in the next, they're listed CBA and CAB, every imaginable combination. And so if you are not looking at the sample ballot for your particular, it's called a style, your particular unique combination of offices to vote on, which varies from area to area, the sequence in which they're listed, which varies from one area to another, then they would look different.
Yeah, but and I'm not sure about that, Lisa. I mean, my understanding was, at least in the state of California, is that you're supposed to get the sample ballot that looks just like your regular ballot.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And why you don't, I don't know.
never has happened. I mean, I'm trying to think of an election that I voted in where I actually found that that was the case. Nope.
Okay, we'll have to look into that. Open question. Ted, you're next.
Yeah, the correspondence of a sample ballot to the normal ballot in many jurisdictions is carefully established. There are problems. For example, there are places where they add the final ballot will be defined in the last 48 hours before the election. And when that happens, somebody drops out, something changes. Of course, you've got a problem if you have some things that are printed. The other problem that happens in California is that we have these two booklets, the state and the federal, and
No, it's the state and the county.
State and the county. Okay, forgive me. And I think that's also a problem. I mean, but I've seen in many jurisdictions. In fact, it turns out that you can save a lot of vote mistakes by filling out a sample ballot beforehand. Whatever you use to fill it out and make a list and check it against can reduce your errors by like a third. So that's a big deal. I wanted to just speak for a moment about Marissa's thought, which is, I just want to give an example. In LA County, they had 2 hours of voting of ballot training back when I was evaluating this. And they had these folders that had these pink, green, blue tabs for the different things you had to look up as a poll worker. And in Chicago, they had 2 days of training, and they had a book, a thick ass book. And what I found was the problems Marissa's describing reminded me of what I saw in Chicago, which was people were overwhelmed with the information, and it was done too much in advance, and it was done in a classroom setting. And then people made lots of mistakes. Whereas the shorter introduction with good materials, well-designed materials with these tabs on them in different colored paper, people were doing a much better job at finding the problem and the solution. And then one other problem that was the solution is that back in 2000, the famous election that screwed up, there was, maybe it was even more recent than that. The election officials would call in to the election center in LA, and they'd have a 40-minute wait. So if they have a problem, they were not being able to get through. So now that we're using the internet, poll books, and better communication things, when a poll worker has a problem, you want them to be able to get an answer from somebody official. So those are, I don't know if those are relevant.
So I can speak to some of those supports for poll workers in California, or at least Alameda County these days. We had really good support, I felt like. We had a young man who only had 4 or 5 vote centers that he was responsible for. And so he could go around and visit with each of us twice a day, at least. And he happened to be present at a time when one of our printers failed. And of course, we were doing all this printing of ballots on demand. And he said, let me see if I have another ink cartridge for that one in my car. And he actually did. So that like saved us hours and so on. But if he hadn't, we had a backup printer that we could use.
Oh, one more thing
And
about
that was
John's.
good. We also had a special.
Good.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, anyway, we had a special phone, and we actually had 2 phones that we could call to downtown with. I called it downtown, you know, to the ROV headquarters. And so if we had any problems of equipment, or somebody had a problem of some other sort, or somebody got sick and they had to leave, and I might want a replacement worker to come in, we had the direct line to the, you know, we had the hotline to support. So Alameda County at least has taken those few measures that really help to
Super.
support the poll workers on site. The crazy part was, of course, now here's one of the other things, and I think some of us have spoken to this already. Voters don't understand the relationship between the registrar of voters office and the specific site that they're using as a voting site for this time. And because we were at the church, people said things to us like how good it is for you to volunteer. No, we're getting paid, but we're not getting paid very much. And the fact that we're at the church blesses the whole election. Okay, thank you so much, but that has nothing to do with it. And you know, there's much confusion about the relationship between. We weren't in the sanctuary, we were in the social hall or the multi-purpose room or whatever they call it. And the security in there was only partial, because we would lock the front door of that room, but we knew that the several teachers for the preschool and so on had the keys to the back of the room, and the kitchen was on the other side. So at any time, people from the church might be going into the rooms that were adjacent to the place that we were using as a polling place. And it's kind of crazy, you know. How little I know about physical security, and yet I could tell this was not a well-secured site. However, every night we find, this is good, they've changed the instructions. Every night we put away everything and locked it up that had anything to do with changing votes. We left the pens out, but put away all the electronic equipment that was keeping the poll records up to date, who's voted and who hasn't. And then, of course, you know, so many people have special cases. You get people who walk in and say, I'm from Merced County, but I want to vote today. And then I say, well, this is, you know, you can do a provisional vote, but it's not going to get to the place that you need it to get to in time, right? So all they get, anyway, it's too hard to vote across counties.
Yeah, a provisional vote is something that came up in 2002, where if you go into a polling place and you say, I should vote here, and that you're not on the registration list,
right,
you are allowed to vote
yes,
for federal offices. So you
can mark anything you want to, but only the federal ones will count. But the question is, if you don't have an address in this county that we can tie you to, you're not going to get counted. You can say, I want this to go to San Joaquin County, or I'm really visiting from LA County, and I really care about the president and the Senate election, which are standard across the state. There's no way we can physically deliver the ballot you cast to LA County in time for them to count it and it to be received by the deadline.
But the reason for provisional ballots was there was a lot of people that thought they were registered and were being denied votes, and that's
right. And so
it solved a lot of problems.
Yes, and now we have these 2 categories, and thank God they're kind of starting to fold them in together. There's a conditional vote and a provisional vote. Don't ask me to separate them. I have to go and look at my book to tell you how they're different. So, and you know, and now the other thing is also that they have enabled us, the poll workers, to change your physical address as long as you're still inside the county. but we can change your record right there. And then you still fill out the, effectively a new registration form.
I want to make a comment about Nancy's description of the polling place. So polling places, they're supposed to be accessible. That means people who wheel in a wheelchair, and something like 70% have gotten to. And the thing that's really important is that polling places should be checked out and designed and tested before the day of election. And that's one of the good things about using the same place over and over again. So you understand and have institutional memory, as we're talking about the things that Nancy has just described. When that doesn't happen, you have people go out with Sharpies and make signs. And the trouble with Sharpies and making signs ad hoc, and you heard a bunch of stories about Nancy trying to solve problems, figuring out how to make things work in spite of the fact that it hadn't been thought of ahead of time, is that this is more common than it should be. And it causes problems. I have a nice photograph of 4 polling places in one place where there was a narrow door going in, and the line was 40 minutes, but only one polling place was full. So all the other polling places, depending on which polling place you went to, it could have happened instantly. And so bad polling place design is a really lingering and dangerous problem, and it causes loss of on the order of 1% of votes.
Lisa.
Countrywide.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, this last election, I was just out of surgery. I was recovering from a surgery, and I was offered an aide, somebody from the Alameda County where I am, who would supposedly come to my house and help me to vote. I didn't actually use that, but can you tell me what that involves? How does that work?
I don't know about the going to your house. I know about the drive-up voting. So if you were able to get somebody to drive you to the polling place and then send them in to tell us that you were there, we would send out a worker with the ballot, if you didn't have your ballot, with a ballot, and observe you vote, and then take it back sealed, into the polling place. So we could have a designated assistant, one of our poll workers, one of the clerks. They have 3 designations: captain, judge, and clerk here. Different places, they call them different things. But anyway, we would be able to help you with drive-up voting.
Best practices would be to have 2 people there, so everybody's observing, so that nobody can do some shenanigan with you.
Yeah,
right.
They actually offered that one to me, but they said the full service. They told me full service is still, they'll come to my house, because I could not get into a vehicle at that point.
Right.
That they would come to my house and sit there with me and help me vote.
That sounds good.
They called that full service.
I love it. They don't tell us about that because we're not going to go out and do that, right? We're there to staff the polling place.
Yeah, I just had never heard of that. Had no idea.
No, it's a great service. I love it.
I don't think that's a universally available thing.
No, and it's also a very risky thing, because you need to make sure that these people are legit and not somebody there who's there to make sure that you vote the way they want you to vote.
Yeah, that's why I was asking this.
Right, and that argues again for the 2 people rather than 1.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Yeah.
I don't think their full service allows for 2 people to go out, but I could be wrong.
John's point is a big deal.
Yep. Well, I wasn't sure we'd have enough to talk about to fill the hour and a half, but look at it's 9
voting.
o'clock.
We can go on all night long. And forgive me, I spent a little bit of time back at the beginning of the mess, starting something called the Voting Technology Project at MIT, and so that's kind of where some of my background comes from. But all this on the ground, I'm just sharing your introduction, I hope. All of that on the ground and working with this Center for Civic Design is really a fascinating story, Nancy, that you've shared with us. And I think that this kind of care and thought and expecting to do experiments all the time on anything we build is important. But voting, I have often said, is difficult, because whatever we do that's important, we have more stress with. Whatever we do rarely, we have less experience, as John was telling us with. And those two things come together to make these errors much more possible, much more, and the design matters even more in that case. So thank you very much, Nancy, and thank you everybody for coming. And with that,
Thank you, everybody, for showing up.
Yeah, we appreciate you staying around too. And,
Oh, and I was
again next Tuesday.
and-
Yes, any more you want to say?
the one thing I was going to say is you announced the April program with Don Norman. That's great. And I wanted to make sure people also know that in March, we're going to have Jared Spool. So we got a couple of headliners coming in the spring and lots of future headliners all the rest of the time.
Yeah. Can you say say something about Jared Spool, just to make people
Jared Spool is the owner and operator of a company called UIE, User Interface Engineering. And now he's more actually switched over to be an educator, and he's running in service and professional development work in conjunction with a program called Center, which is spelled the two different ways, where people can learn about user experience roles and functions and dilemmas and what to do with them in a classroom or virtual classroom setting. So he's been doing this kind of work for as long as you and I have, Ted. Yeah.
And what's the date in March? Jared?
It's the second Tuesday.
Always the
Okay.
second Tuesday, always 7:30.
And Nancy, I would definitely love to chat with you
Sure.
offline after this, because I'd like to get involved in that.
Right. Well, I'm not involved with the Center for Civic Design anymore myself. I mean, I'm friends with all those people, and you can certainly write to Whitney and say you heard me talk about this issue. And does she? They
Whitney
do collect
Quisenberry.
Quisenberry, Quesenberry, 1 R.
At the Center for Civic Design.
Yes, it's called civicdesign.org. That's how you find it. But John, there are lots of opportunities also to do things related to civic tech and civic design. And we've had speakers about this topic previously from BayCHI. So there's like an innovation office in San Jose where they do stuff. And they may be able to involve volunteers as well as professionals.
Okay.
There's Code for America, which is constantly needing more UX help. And you may be familiar with our friend Sid Harrell, CYDHARRELL, and she is very much involved in civic tech and has written a little book and gave us a talk about it at one point. And so she may be another source of good ideas on how you can get involved. But I'm certainly willing to talk to you. Sure.
So
Okay.
with that, I'm going to have to leave, and we're going to have to end this program. And I hope everybody makes new friends, such as John and Nancy, and that we get together as many or more people each month. And it's great to have you all.